Hey, so I well, I know you don't remember this, but one of the things that I did was I actually read a little bit to you and your mom after you were born, um, and I didn't really read much since after that, but I've gotten back into it a little bit. It's taken a couple years, but I came across a story within a story, and I thought, why not share it? It's um It's a cool story. Obviously, you're gonna be missing some of the backstory and everything, but the I'm trying to think if there's stuff that I need to explain about it, but I think it'll be okay. We'll just go for it and see what happens. So set the scene. It's world of not elves. Sorry, it's a world of fairies, magic. And there was a war centuries ago, and this is a story that's now being told by one of the most powerful fairies, who's teaching another one to be able to fly because she can shapeshift and grow wings, and so she needs to learn how to fly. And this is part of a lesson that he was saying, because he also had to learn to fly later on in life, and lore, blah 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 blah. It's not worth going too in depth about. Let's just get to the story. A few years after the war, Riss brought me back a story. It was a gift, the story, for me. He went to see Miriam and Dracon in their new home. The visit so secret even we hadn't known it was happening until he returned. We knew their people hadn't drowned in the sea as everyone believed, as they wanted people to believe. You see, when Miriam freed her people from the Queen of the Black Land, she led all of them, nearly 50,000 of them, across the desert, all the way to the shores of the Erythraean Sea, Dracon's aerial legion providing cover. But they got to the sea and found the ships they had arranged to transport them over the narrow channel to the next kingdom had been destroyed by the queen herself, who sent her lingering armies to drag her former slaves back. Dracon's people, the Seraphim, are winged. Like us, but their wings are feathered, and unlike us, their army and society allow women to lead, to fight, to rule. All of them are gifted with mighty magic of wind and air, and when they beheld that army charging after them, they knew their own force was too small to face them. So they cleaved the sea itself, made a path through the water, all the way through the channel, and ordered the humans to run. They did, but Miriam insisted on remaining behind until every last one of her people had crossed. Not one human would she leave behind, not one. They were about halfway through the crossing when the army reached them. The Seraphim were spent. Their magic could barely hold the sea passage, and Dracon knew that if they held it any longer, that army would make it across and butcher the humans on the other side. The Seraphim fought off the vanguard on the floor of the sea, and it was bloody and brutal and chaotic. And during the melee, they didn't see Miriam skewered by the queen herself. Dracon didn't see. He thought she made it out, carried by one of his soldiers. He ordered the parted sea to come down to drown the enemy force. But a young Seraphim cartographer named Nefel saw Miriam go down. Nefel's lover was one of Dracon's generals, and it was she who realized Miriam and Nefel were missing. Dracon was frantic. But their magic was spent, and no force in the world could hold back the sea as it barreled down, and no one could reach his mate in time. But Nefel did. Nefel, you see, was a cartographer because she'd been rejected from the Legion's fighting ranks. Her wings were too small, the right one somewhat malformed, and she was slight, short enough that she'd be a dangerous gap in the front lines when they fought shield to shield. Dracon had let her try out for the Legion as a courtesy to her lover, but Nefel failed. She could barely carry the Seraphim shield, and her smaller wings hadn't been strong enough to keep up with the others. God. I should be doing this in person. So she had made herself invaluable as our cartographer during the war, helping Dracon and her lover find the geographical advantages in their battles. And she became Miriam's dearest friend during those long months as well. And that day on the seafloor, Nefel remembered that her friend had been in the back of the line. She returned for her, even as all others fled for the distant shore. She found Miriam skewered on the queen's spear, bleeding out. The sea wall started to come down on the opposite shore, killing the approaching army first, racing toward them. Miriam told Nefel to save herself, but Nefel would not abandon her friend. She picked her up and flew. Azrael's voice was soft with awe. When Riss spoke to Dracon about it years later, he still didn't have words to describe what happened. Defied all logic, all training. Nefel, who had never been strong enough to hold a Seraphim shield, carried Miriam triple the weight. More than that, she flew. The sea was crashing down upon them, but Nefel flew like the best of Seraphim warriors. The seafloor was a labyrinth of jagged rocks, too narrow for the Seraphim to fly through. They tried during their escape and crashed into them, but Nefel, with her smaller wings, had they been 1 inch wider, she would not have fit. More than that, Nefel soared through them. Miriam, dying in her arms, as fast and skilled as the greatest of Seraphim. Nefel, who had been passed over, who had been forgotten, she outraced death itself. There was not a foot of room between her and the water on either side of her when she shot up from the seafloor, not half of that rising up at her feet. Yet her too small wingspan, that deformed wing, they did not fail her, not once, not for one wing beat. She made it. Suffice to say, her lover made Nefel her wife that night, and Miriam, well, she is alive today because of Nefel. So we occasionally remind each other that what we think to be our greatest weakness can sometimes be our greatest strength, and that the most unlikely person can alter the course of history. And since then, we have privately adapted the Nefel philosophy with our own armies. Nefel philosophy. I forgot to finish the book I was reading to you. It took me a couple years to go back and finish that one. It's probably pretty crappy reading of it, but yeah. Hope you're doing well. Thanksgiving's coming up. I hope you have a good Thanksgiving.